Welcome to the Creepin' It Real Show, your one-stop shop for not-so-serious weird news, TV and movie reviews, and some paranormal shenanigans. We'll also take dives into what's going on in pop culture. You can follow us on Twitter at creepin_it, on Facebook at facebook.com/creepinitrealshow, and you can also shoot us an email at creepinitrealshow@gmail.com. All right, creepers, thanks for jumping in to our new episode of Creeping It Real. Today we are going to do a movie review of In the Tall Grass. It was released by Netflix over the last couple of weeks. It looked pretty interesting. I dove into it, and for the most part, I enjoyed it. So I'm very excited to hear what Kristi thinks about her foray into watching this film. And Kristi, how are you doing in North Georgia?
Oh, I'm doing all right. It's finally cooled down a little bit today, so I'm pretty happy. I've been in South Georgia the last couple of days for work, and it's been hot as balls. So I don't know if balls are really hot, but that's appears to be a thing. So
Hey, look, it was 98 degrees, I believe, this last Friday. And of course, we know, we're into October. So whenever I watch the news and I see other places around the country that are really starting to cool off, it's really, it's really hurtful to walk outside and to get hit with that humidity. But as you were just saying, the last few days, it's been pretty decent weather-wise. So I guess we're going to get at least a temporary um, a temporary show from Jack Frost. But honestly, the only thing that I can say is I see a lot of the leaves falling, and I grow some vegetables here and there. I can tell by my plants that, that they're feeling like fall is actually here. So I'm excited for it. I got a lot of cool jackets and shoes that I need to rock.
yeah, me too. I'm ready to hang up all my maxi dresses and get in some nice fall gear. So I welcome it as long as they don't psych us out and do a couple of days of cool and go, haha, just kidding, 100-degree temperatures again. That pisses me off when they do that.
You know what? We'll take what we can get because I think this week it's considered cooler, but it's pretty much going to be in the 80s. So we'll see where it takes us. But seeing as we've got another weekend of recording this podcast, I just wanted to ask before we dive into talking about In the Tall Grass, was there anything else on television, Netflix, or movies that you've seen recently that you'd like to recommend?
Um, well, I saw a couple of movies last night and I'm pissed off at myself because I can't find one of them. And I can't remember. It's the first one I watched. I'm looking right now, but I can multitask. So, last night I watched one I do remember is The Last Exorcism, and exorcism movies in my mind have kind of been played out, but you know what? It wasn't bad. The ending, a lot of people I saw in reviews, people were bitching about the ending and they were like, "Oh, this is so typical." But I disagree. I didn't think it was a typical ending. So, bizarrely enough, I was a little confused about that, but it was definitely worth a watch. So, if anybody's interested in looking for some good horror, go for it. I'd give it a shot. It was good. I mean, it's no The Exorcist, but it's watchable. It was good.
Okay. Well, that's a recommendation. I'll definitely look into that now. At the
Oh,
end of the last,
I
what
remember
what?
what it
Are
was,
you all right? Bring it
and
because I'm waiting.
I didn't even find
Okay.
it. It just popped into my brain.
Okay.
Okay, this is
What
the
do we
most
got?
fucked up movie, and I actually really enjoyed it. It was such a bizarre concept that it was so outrageous that it worked. It's called Horns, and it has
Oh yeah, with Frodo in it.
yeah, it
Okay.
had well, no, it had Daniel Radcliffe in it.
Yeah, is that the guy?
That's
Oh,
Harry
you're
Potter.
right. That's not the Frodo guy. That's the guy who looks like the
That's Harry
Frodo guy.
Potter.
I
Yeah.
I watched the very first part of that, so I should just go ahead and keep on watching.
It was different. It was just such a different concept. And, it was cheesy in like their love is so all encompassing. But it was different. And apparently it's by Joe Hill, Stephen King's son, which kind of plays into our reviews today. But I was so blown away by just the originality of it that the cheesiness of it etched away, if that makes any sense. It was kind of like the Marianne series. Like, you're sitting here going, come on, but you keep watching it and it just gets more and more outrageous until you're like, what the fuck? And it just was a bizarre, different movie. And I really enjoy, like the movie we're going to talk about today, when people change horror and create new, areas of horror. And I thought he did that. I thought it was an interesting concept. So definitely check it out. Give it a try. I mean, I'm not like, oh my God, this was the greatest movie ever. It was just different. And I really enjoy that.
Yeah, I'll definitely check it out. And I guess the thumbs up thing that they have on Netflix, if you look at it, I think
Hmm.
it's 5 stars or something like that.
Yeah, I think honestly, in just the bizarreness, it should get
Yeah,
5 stars. I mean, Joe Hill definitely got his dad's like mind of insanity, of horror that isn't just like a zombie, or they create the shit that you just, where does this come from? I mean, it's just
yeah.
amazing. So I got to give him some props for sure.
Well, streaming has come a long way, and I mean, even if you look at In the Tall Grass, I think it's at 5 stars on Netflix as well. But I
Hmm.
know that there's a lot of people who watch it who'll be like, "Eh," you know what I'm saying?
You know what? I loved
It's
it.
2 or 3 stars. But
I loved it. I'd never heard of it. I had never heard of it, and until I just saw in your notes that this was a Joe Hill Stephen King thing, I had no idea when I watched it, which I'm glad I didn't. I want to see it with eyes that don't know where it's coming from, just to like give myself something new to be introduced to.
well, just as Christy had just mentioned, In the Tall Grass is a horror novella by Stephen King and his son Joe Hill. It was originally published in 2 parts in the June, July, and August 2012 issues of Esquire magazine. This is King and Hill's second collaboration since Throttle, which was published back in 2019. So let's go ahead and dive in and just, talk about this Netflix film. Just as Christy had mentioned earlier, I don't want to say that I was skeptical because I had zero idea, what it was about. I
Hmm.
didn't know that Stephen King had anything to do with it. It was just one of those things that popped up prominently in my Netflix queue. So I ended up giving it a chance, and I thought that it was pretty decent because a lot of listeners would know that last week I had picked The Gate
Hmm.
as the movie that I wanted to review. I started trying to watch that movie, and I just couldn't do it. I could never get into it. I mean, there were large stretches of last week where I literally had the
Whoop, sorry.
availability and the time to do it and to watch it rather,
Hmm.
and I just could never get through it. So then I ended up changing my mind and telling Christy and Moni at the time that I wanted to change it to. I think it was a movie, another anthology series. It was on Amazon Prime. It was called Tales of Halloween. That was even more horrible
How
than
is
The
that
Gate.
possible?
I couldn't even, I couldn't even, like, I just felt bad because I was like, everything I recommend to him is worse than the thing that's before. So seeing as I kept seeing this tall grass and this little avatar, on my Netflix, I ended up giving it a chance, and I thought that it was decent. So we're switching over to this, and I would say even before we begin doing this summary, I think that anybody should probably give it a chance. I definitely think that it's the interesting nature of it is definitely above average. So I don't think that
Absolutely.
I don't think that anybody would feel like they really wasted their hour and 30 minutes on it. So it's a decent thing just to get your fix on. Hey, you're paying for Netflix, why not dive into some things that you might not have tried before? So let's go ahead and dive in. So the summary of In the Tall Grass. So we begin this movie with siblings Becky and Cal DeMuth. They're traveling to San Diego so that Becky, who's 6 months pregnant, can organize a way to give up her baby. Becky ends up getting nauseous on the road, and they end up stopping outside an old church so that she can vomit. The pair end up hearing a young boy named Tobin shouting for help in a nearby field of tall grass. They later end up hearing his mother, named Natalie, begging him not to call out to anyone and call anyone in. So I've got to ask you, Christy, you're riding, you've got all these things on your mind. You probably have another 1,000 miles before you get to your destination. You're feeling sick. You start vomiting on the side of the road. Then you see this humongous field of tall grass, and you hear, what seemingly is a young child crying out for help. What do you do? Do you just pretend and keep it moving? Do you call the police? Do you? I mean, I'm very curious now. Meanwhile, you're pregnant at the same
Mm-hmm.
time, so uh, your antennas might be up a little bit higher and being caring for kids. When you're
Yeah.
going that. But how do you handle that situation initially?
Well, I mean, she's pregnant. So that, first of all, you're already kind of a mama bear. The second you start to feel that baby, you change as a person. You like now know this is the first time in your life you're going to give your entire life for a child. So it just kind of changes you in chemistry wise. And plus, I mean, I look, if these people didn't know they were in a horror movie, if they knew they were in a horror movie, oh hell no, don't go in the tall grass, that I would have gone in and looked for the kid, because what are the chances that you're never going to come out? Like, it just doesn't,
Yeah.
in your mind, it's a normal day. It's just some tall grass, and you're going to go help this kid and move on about the rest of your trip. So I would have gone. I would have gone and done it with kidless if I had no kids. I definitely would have done it if I heard this little boy crying and needed help. I probably would have called the police first. Like, made sure, I've got service, called the police and made a report first, and then gone in to help maybe, or like one of us stayed and called the police and the other. I don't know. I mean, it's so hard to say what you do in a situation like that, but I would have definitely tried to help him. Absolutely.
Well, I've got to say this. First and foremost, Becky ends up doing what you said. She
Yeah.
starts to call the police, and then she's calling the police as she's walking into this field of tall grass. And as she's progressing, the signal's getting worse. So
Hmm.
why the hell do you keep walking,
Right.
making the signal worse and not go, what I'm saying, step back out so you can
Exactly.
get good reception? But just like you were saying, these people are in a horror movie. They're not really thinking too rationally. But like you, I probably would have tried to call 911, but I probably would have walked over to see if anybody was in that church, because they
Right.
park outside of the church. But obviously concerned, they end up entering, and they, of course, they get separated, and they start finding out that their distance from one another seems to be changing. It's very odd. So over time, they start getting panicked, and the pair decide to leave, but they're unable to. So night falls, and Cal stumbles across a bruised Tobin who claims that the grass won't move dead things. Now, if I run into this little kid, and that's like one of the first things that he's one of the first things that he's saying, I'm not feeling too good. Especially after having been out there for hours searching for this child, and of
Yeah.
course your sister. That's just not reassuring. So
Mm-mm.
uh, let's talk about our introduction to this young child, Tobin. I mean, there's nothing that said that this is going to be a freaky situation in the way that this kid looked when we're first introduced.
Not at all. Yeah, no, it's hard to talk about the beginning now when you know about the end, because you find out so much more. But yeah, I mean, when they walk in the grass, it's not going to be good, because you're watching a horror movie. But I can't imagine being in that situation, and the panic or whatever sets in, trying to find your way out, not being able to like hear people correctly. Every time they talk, like the directions change from the voices, and it's just, yeah. I was feeling a little bit of anxiety on this.
Now, I never knew that blades of grass grew that big.
Hmm.
You know what I mean? I just
Right.
didn't. Initially when you see it, I'm always, in my mind, I'm thinking, oh,
That's
cornfield,
what
wheat field,
exactly what I thought.
or
Yes.
something like that. But it's literally some thick diesel tall grass. So now that we can both pretty much agree on Tobin's just, really creepy, Becky ends up encountering Tobin's father, whose name is Ross, but they end up getting separated in the grass. So Tobin ends up leading Cal to an ancient rock that's in a field, and he tries to encourage him to touch it, but they end up being interrupted by Becky, who's attacked by an unseen figure. So, meanwhile, the father of Becky's child Travis ends up arriving looking for her and Cal. He ends up finding their car parked outside the church. And then, he finds a couple of other little things, little clues, and he ends up investigating the field. And he eventually stumbles across Tobin, who leads him to Becky's rotting corpse,
Mm-hmm.
which was, the corpse was pretty creepy. They did a great job with, with makeup and a lot of the effects that they used. So as Travis ends up, of course, breaking down and grieving, he loses sight of Tobin. Now, at the same time, and something that seems like an earlier version of Tobin ends up arriving at the church with Natalie and Ross. So hearing Travis, who's now calling out to Tobin, their dog Freddie ends up running into the grass, and the family runs in after him, where Travis hears Tobin and looks for him. The family ends up getting in a panic, and they scatter, and Ross is stumbling across the rock and touching it as night is falling. So the morning rises, and it shows Becky and Cal re-entering the grass as they investigate Tobin's cries. They find the boy and Travis, and they're confused about the different timelines that are
Yeah,
happening.
so here's where we it gets really confusing trying to talk about this, without watching it. Is what's starting to happen is we went from the two, Cal and Becky running into Tobin, who had clearly been there for a very long time. Then you flash to after all of that experience, you then see Tobin and his family going into the grass. And it just, there's a crazy loop and weird time loops happening inside the grass. And so if you go around certain areas, you can actually kind of go back in time almost. And so it's really hard to explain on a podcast, but bear with us, people.
Well, it is. I mean, I guess The Rock, and we'll. But you know what? I'm just going to keep going because we're
Yeah,
going to
go
end
ahead.
up speaking on this again. So the group ends up spotting a building in the distance, and they walk to it. And Becky receives a call from someone who's sounding like her, stating that they need to stop Cal. They need to stop Cal from ending up hurting Travis. So as they're walking, the grass enters Becky's stomach, and she ends up passing out, and she ends up being recovered by Ross, who reunites with his son as the sun goes down again. So Ross leads them to the rock, where they end up being confronted by a startled Natalie, who is Ross's wife. She's claiming that she saw Becky's corpse earlier and ends up warning everyone that's there not to touch the rock. So Ross gets more and more aggravated and agitated until everybody else decides to leave. He ends up fighting and wounding Travis, and he kills Natalie before pursuing the others, claiming that the rock showed him what is really happening, and he doesn't want to leave. Now, when Ross when Ross crushes Natalie's skull,
Yeah.
that was some really great work
Yeah.
by the people in post production,
And
because I was like, man, like, why though, Ross?
yeah, and mind you, this is his wife and the mother of his child. This is Natalie is his wife, and so he literally gets her head in his hands and crushes her head. Her eye pops out. Like it's nasty, and then it goes further. But yeah, that was something.
And all of these things are happening where you as a viewer, you're pretty much at the height of kind of being confused. You're
Yeah.
starting seeing all of these different things, and well, Becky, Cal, and Travis and Tobin, they end up reaching the abandoned building while scouting, and Travis and Cal discover Freddie, the dog, has managed to escape the field via this hole that was in it. So a jealous Cal, and it's kind of, did you feel like some of these different versions that one version of the Cal kind of felt something for his sister
Yeah.
that
Well,
wasn't?
yeah, and her husband or Travis called it out and was like, "You want to fuck your sister," basically. And that caused them to get into a fight. But yeah, he was I mean, I don't know. Yeah, I mean, there it could be borderline incestuous, or he was just finally like happy to be like the main person in the picture, being the hero, helping Becky escape.
Yeah.
Trying to get rid of this child, and he's trying. I don't know, but yeah, I got that. I got that feeling too.
Well, so there ends up being a fight, and Travis ends up getting pushed off of a roof, which ends up alerting Ross to where their location is. So Tobin, having witnessed Cal being pushed off that building by Travis, he ends up panicking. He runs to a field while Becky and Cal are attempting to escape together. Becky ends up refusing to leave Travis and goes back. And as Cal flees, he's strangled to death by Ross, where it's revealed that they're in a time loop, permanently being hunted by an insane Ross in the grass. So Travis is revealed to have survived and goes looking for Becky. And they can hear each other on opposite sides of the field. And Becky ends up admitting that her plan was to give up the baby. But of course, she eventually ends up deciding against doing that. And we're going back to all of this thing talking about time loops.
Mm-hmm.
Are you a fan of watching movies and then they end up doing all this time loop stuff? Or do you like as far as I'm concerned, I think that people can do it as long as you have to kind of explain
Mm-hmm.
things out a little bit more plain,
Right.
for the average person
Uh,
that's watching it.
yeah. I mean, I like it as long as it works. And they do it the right way. If you just throw that in there to make things easier to explain, easier to happen, like I want all these things to happen, and so let's just throw a time loop in there. But I don't feel like that was the situation in this movie. And I really want to read the book now because I can't imagine how difficult it was to create a movie based on a story like this. I bet the story is even more fucked up. So,
Yeah, but it's also, like I said, it's a novella, so it's a short
oh,
story.
it
So I
is. I
don't,
forgot about
yeah,
that.
so I don't. I think it probably is something that we could knock out. I
Mm-hmm.
kind of in preparation for the show, because a lot of times what I'll do is I'll reference like Wikipedia for some of their for some of their summaries or
Mm-hmm.
whatever plot details. And when you read the summary for the novella, it's really short.
Oh.
So it's something that I think that we probably could kind of knock out and
Mm-hmm.
maybe in the future kind of talk about what we felt were the differences between these two.
Yeah.
Um, but for me, I do think that once you start doing all this time jump stuff, it can get confusing and take you out of it. But this, not so much. I think even if you were like, what the hell's going on? I think a lot of the effects and a lot of the creepy things that they do with the grass, it kind of brings you back into saying, you know what, I still have to finish this even though I'm confused like hell. But of course, Ross being the cat that he is, he ends up attacking Becky, and he ends up escaping as this storm ends
Mm-hmm.
up hitting the field. So Becky's confronted by these grass creatures that carry her to the rock, which has all these prophetic markings on it, and they happen to be relating to Becky's pregnancy. So after seeing this vision underneath the rock, Becky ends up passing out. She awakens to find her brother Cal, who's caring for her, and he's feeding her something,
Yeah.
which is later revealed to be her baby. And if there's any, you know how like you say that things with eyes freak you out, like people get
Mm-hmm.
stabbed in the eye or poked in the eye.
Mm-hmm.
It's when people like turn the audio up to a trillion of people eating and that sound of like people eating meat. It sounds gross when you hear
Mm-hmm.
really good audio of it. But when you saw him feeding, putting that stuff in her mouth, I almost immediately I was like, yeah, he's feeding her somebody that already died, or it's that baby.
Oh.
But if it's the baby, how could he do that? But anyway, well, what did you think about that scene? I thought that was pretty cool.
That was cool. And first of all, even if it is just the grass, the grass is fucked up. So even before it kind of dawned on me that this might not just be grass, even the grass at that time, it's not just normal grass. So you're like, oh my God, what is that going to do to her? And then, of course, it flashes to what she's really eating. And it was just like, oh my God, like, it's just so fucked up.
Yeah, it's so messed up, and it's kind of confusing visually because when you see it, you could tell it's something else, but then it had some grass in it, and but
Mm-hmm.
as he kept doing it, you started seeing it that it was flesh. So it ends up being that this version of Cal, it ends up being revealed to be Ross, and Travis stumbles across her unconscious body. So Tobin finds him, and they end up being confronted by Ross, who ends up mortally wounding Travis. As Ross tries to make Tobin touch the rock, Becky ends up saving him before she eventually dies from the wounds that she has. Travis ends up killing Ross. Then he ends up realizing the only way to understand what the grass is to touch the rock. He ends up doing so, and he sees a bunch of strange visions. He ends up grabbing Tobin's hand, taking him through the grass, and drops him through the hole. And that was the same hole that the dog had went in, instructing him to stop Becky and Cal from entering the grass. So Tobin ends up emerging in the church that we saw at the beginning in the past and manages to stop Becky and Cal from entering the grass in the first place and ends up kind of closing the time loop. So Becky decides to keep her baby and they end up driving back. And Travis listens to them from the grass leaving and dies peacefully. Uh, that I can see people beefing about that ending though, but um, I found that wow, it just seemed to be kind of an easy thing for Tobin. Well, of course, none of this stuff is easy. It's a time loop, but it's interesting that the time loop would be stopped because Tobin ends up stopping Becky and Cal from entering the grass. But if it's a time loop, yeah, you know what I mean? Like that's something that's already it's weird. I'm just like, what? That's the problem when you're entering all this stuff in. But I thought that it was cool, but I also found it strange how you were talking about, this maternal thing, how you're going to be feeling for children when you're pregnant. I do think that you totally give a side eye to this dirty little kid that looks like he's been through hell,
Yeah.
stopping you out of nowhere, being like, you know what I'm saying? And then you're like, oh, well, just hop in the car and let go. You know what I mean? It's like,
Well, I have a
that,
question for you.
yeah.
Since they stopped it from happening, so then the girl, they get in the car instead of going into the grass. Did Travis then ever end up going? Like they stopped it. So yeah, he dies, but then did that like change I wonder if it changed the future.
Well, even if it, well, yeah, I mean that's totally a possibility because I was sitting here thinking, well, if they left and went back, is there a version of this that has
Right.
Travis still?
Right. Like,
Just,
so that means that, and that was kind of in my head. Yeah, he
well,
died from that dimensional, whatever. I don't know if this was supposed to be dimensions or just time different.
well, but I don't know because, like I said, he's listening to them and it almost seems like he knows or is content that they're
Right.
going to be all right, but that's in the same timeline though. So
Right.
I don't know.
But then they reach San Diego. I just wondered if, okay, they leave and they reach San Diego, which is where they were going. Does that mean he
Well, no,
then?
remember they ended up going back. They
Oh,
ended up
that's
not.
right. That's right.
Yeah, they ended up not going to San Diego.
So
So
then she
that's what
goes
I'm thinking.
back and he's not there, or she goes back and she changes the
I don't know.
future. Like, I just wonder. That's kind of how I was trying to figure out. Like, at the end, I was like, oh, he died. I'm like, or did he? Like, maybe he died peacefully thinking that was it and he was selflessly saved his girlfriend and his baby, but maybe he also changed where he never had to leave. So then he would be there.
Well,
I don't know.
well, maybe that's the point of writing this type of stuff. So we'll sit around forever trying to figure out,
My
what's what.
brain
But
hurts.
but But for the most part, creepers, I definitely would recommend this as something to watch. I mean, the direction and the production value, considering they did, probably didn't spend that much money on the movie, and they definitely picked their spots where they used the budget really wisely. So I would definitely recommend this. I do not recommend Tales from Halloween at all. There's one. I mean, it's not even. That anthology series is cool, just mainly because I like short little stories or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But these are just horrendous. Like they're not even. I think that they could have probably pulled off something maybe a lot better had they given each of these stories at least a half hour,
Mm-hmm.
a piece.
Yeah.
And a lot of them are really short. There's one that involves like a guy who carves a pumpkin that ends up murdering, everybody. And that is that's one of those you have to be really drunk and not caring. It's actually one of those things where you put it on the TV, you get drunk, you turn the volume down, and then you and your friends just lip sync what you think everybody's doing. Doing on it. So, I mean, you could totally make a game out of the pumpkin one, but yeah, it's pretty horrible. And the gate, you know what? To be honest with you, like I couldn't even get halfway through it.
Well, I
Looking
watched
at,
the whole damn thing because I didn't see your text in time.
well, did you? I mean,
I mean,
you
I
might
had
have
watched
enjoyed
it
it.
before.
That
I watched it years and years ago. I wasn't. I don't hate it. It's a great movie for kids, to be honest with you. I mean, I think Jay would probably like it because it's about kids. It's cheesy, it's campy, dumb even, but I don't know. I mean, I don't want ever want to watch it again, but I'm not like I don't hate it either. It was hard to get through just because I um I just wasn't really into it, and I had watched Creep Show, so I watched the second week of Creep Show. And each episode has two shows in it. So I watched that. So I went from watching these great Creep Show, you know, this great Creep Show episode to that, and I was just like, oh, like it just wasn't. Yeah, it was a downer for sure. Um,
okay.
but I will recommend Creep Show if you guys are on Shutter or if you've been thinking about it, this is definitely the time to get it. They've got Creepshow on. They're releasing episode every Thursday, and of course they're loading up with horror movies because it's Halloween. And I think it's like $5, and so for $5 for even just the month of October, I mean it's worth it. Just Creepshow is worth it. The first episode had my favorite episode so far is the House in the Head or House of the Head, where this little girl has a carpenter made dollhouse. And, she has her little family in there. Well, this mysterious head that looks like a zombie head appears in her house and starts wreaking havoc in her little playhouse. And just, it's bizarre and it was really good. And then this week I watched Creepshow and it had two good ones. One was like a werewolf themed. The second one, if you've seen the internet blowing up about Creepshow and Bob on Creepshow and where can they get a Bob, the second one is called The Finger, and this guy who he's a famous actor. I can't think of his name, but he plays in a lot of like comedies. Finds a finger on the road, just a random finger, and it grows an entire body thing, and hijinks ensue and shenanigans, and it's pretty hysterical. And now the internet loves Bob. That's what he named this thing that grew from the finger. So it was pretty funny.
Oh, that's what's up. I mean, I had heard. I mean, I kind of got away from this TV series, years ago. But
Mm-hmm.
The Walking Dead. But I just found out over the weekend that they're doing another series, and I think that it looks like it's like teenagers who were young, and these were people who had always their whole experience of life has been, to have known or whatever the apocalypse thing.
Oh,
I
right.
can't, I can't, I can't remember what it's called, but I did see it. So if you're a fan of, The Walking Dead, here's another series. I mean, for me, I just, it doesn't look like it's for me. And like I said, the main series hasn't been for me for a while. There
Mm-hmm.
was a time where I thought that Fear the Walking Dead, as far as writing was concerned and what they were doing with the characters in particular, I thought was superior to The Walking Dead. But it was like the first season and a half or two seasons. I thought it was cool. Then I ended up, just totally stopping watching that as well. I haven't revisited that. But it just goes to show you that AMC is still, I mean, honestly, they really don't have anything else. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Like, because remember, there was a time where they had, Breaking Bad and what was it, Mad Men and The Walking Dead, and now that those other two, Mad Men was on AMC, right? Yeah,
Yeah,
or yeah, it
I
was.
believe so. Yeah.
And I believe that, once those two shows left, they were just left with The Walking Dead. And even though the numbers have gone down drastically on that show, they're still great numbers for that Sunday time slot.
Mm-hmm.
So they still end up being number one or close to number one whenever they're on those nights, even though the ratings have gone down. So they definitely have a built-in fan base. I don't know if the numbers for the Fear the Walking Dead or this new series are going to be, they've always been way lower. Well, the
Mm-hmm.
new series hasn't started yet, but Fear the Walking Dead had lower numbers than The Walking Dead. But I have found that a lot of people tend to like that series a little bit more. But for some reason, it's like gnats. In the summer, it just won't. The series just won't go away. And they're and to me, the fact that they keep on expanding this instead of like trying to perfect or make their flagship better. It seems like they're overextending themselves in these series, but I do know that they have had it in them in the past to have put out a more superior product
Right.
for The Walking Dead, and I still have friends who podcast on it, and they tell me that they're like, oh, it gets better, but I know I'm not going to take the bait, like because one, I would have to go back and watch a few seasons, after I gave it up, and I don't think I could do it. And there were some seasons, where some of the characters that I didn't really like, the Negan character
Mm-hmm.
and how they were portraying the character on that show. Um, I was kind of over it. Like I shouldn't. It became something that I laughed at and not laughed with, and it just wasn't
Right.
good. It kind of felt like it's one of those shows that doesn't have an end game, and I think that that's the problem too. Is that
Yeah.
it's been around for 11 seasons, and you're like, you know, whatever. Even Kirkman decided to end the comic book
Yeah.
recently, so
I mean, the
I
thing
don't know.
with Walking Dead, that first of all, I remember. I mean, the first Walking Dead episode, I remember it was on Halloween. I was just absolutely ecstatic when it came out because it had been so long since cable, or there was a horror series. I mean, you had like X-Files. I was trying to remember before Walking Dead, was there a horror series on regular just cable TV? I mean, yeah, there's horror movies, but it kind of restarted that whole love of the horror genre in series. And
Yeah.
so they really did. They did a lot of big things. I had to quit watching when they got on that bus to go to DC. I'd had enough. I think it was like I think it was like season 4 or 5. And I actually next weekend will be heading out to do a documentary with one of the camera guys that films The Walking Dead. He actually also filmed part of Creepshow. And we've had a lot of back and forth conversations. He actually stopped watching it like seasons ago. So if you've got a cameraman that's not even watching it anymore, I think it's kind of time to end it. And if they're going to restart it with the teen version, I mean, like you, I think it's turning into kind of just like a money thing versus letting a good show die when it's time to die?
Yeah, sometimes. Well, you want to go out on your own terms, and like
Yeah.
to be honest, I mean, but it's hard to say that when, like I said, there was a time where you know that it was a lot of bread for AMC. You know what I
Mm-hmm.
mean? So it's kind of hard, and like I said, they don't have the next thing.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like there's
Right.
no other stuff, so they're trying to squeeze what they can out of it. And like I said, they do have The Walking Dead. I think has a certain bottom. You know
Mm-hmm.
that I don't think that they're going to fall below just because of the diehard people who are going to keep watching. So
Yeah.
the bottom for that show, even on Sundays, and we don't know what's going to be, what's going to be a hit, going forward in the future. But I think that the bottom for that show, it would still probably they would probably still get, you know, 6 million people watching it. You know what I
Right.
mean?
Right.
5, 6 million. And to me, I mean, that's good. 6, 7. If you're getting 6, 7 million people watching a week, and you know, you're doing good on a Sunday night. You know what I mean? So
Right.
that's still great. You know what I mean? But you know, I think that a thing that had drove a lot of people away, like I said, is the quality and really not feeling like that there was really not necessarily end point. And also, you had characters that were interesting that were suffering because they kept adding more and more people,
Hmm.
and it was taking quality time or moments that should have been more character driven might have gotten might have gotten shorted. So, but anyway, that's probably the most I've talked about The Walking Dead in years.
Used to
But
have a show dedicated to it, right?
yeah, I used to be on talking about walkers back in the day for like years. We did
Hmm.
that show, and then I just literally just tapped out like y'all. I'm good on this, um, but yeah, but I would say watch the trailer. I really I'm my bad for not knowing the name of it, but like I said, my lack of interest in the show, I just couldn't really remember the name. But I think that it's a new perspective, I guess. And,
Right, right.
you know what I'm saying? The lead seems interesting on it. But outside of seeing that trailer, we've got Joker, which is in the movie theaters apparently. And I've read some different mixed things on that. But
Hmm.
whenever you end up getting hype, like even so-called negative hype is kind of good hype because you kind of drive people who really might not have been curious. And then when you see different things about the Joker that's been floating around in the media about how some stores are, some movie theaters are having extra security and side-eyeing people who are coming in with masks and all of these types of things, when you're trying to sensationalize something, all you do is, I think you make more people curious and you might actually drive more traffic to it to people who might not have been necessarily interested.
Right.
But you have that. Do you have any intentions of going to see that, or are you just going to wait until
No,
stream?
you know me. I'm not really into the comic stuff. I really like the Joker story. I hear that he should be. The people are saying that he should be nominated for a an Oscar, whether Academy Award, whether you like the movie or not. They're saying that his performance was really good. And so good for him. I mean, I've heard that it's a really different take on the Joker, and it's worth it's worth a watch. I just, if I'm going to go to the movies, I've said this before, I want it to be a big horror movie or a big action movie or sci-fi, something like bigger, you want to watch it on a huge screen, basically. Otherwise, I wait until I can download it on one of my apps.
Okay. Well, it is what it is. You
Yeah.
know what I mean?
Have
I
you
can
watched it
totally
yet?
see.
Did you watch it?
Nah, I
Not yet.
haven't seen it yet.
I'm sure
It's
Moni
debatable.
has.
Well, it's oh yeah, and you know what? And speaking of Moni, she'll probably come back telling us all about it. But she's at New York Comic Con, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And yeah, she's doing her thing out there, so I'm pretty sure she'll have some interesting stories. At least via the gram, she looks like she's having a great time. And
I was going to ask you really quick about this upcoming it's a pre sequel to Misery. And what do you think? What are you thinking
I,
about that?
I don't know about that. Like I don't know
Yeah.
because I like I liked Misery. I don't know about that. I
Yeah.
don't know if that's something that I necessarily need in my life. I can't. I don't know. Like
Yeah.
it's a real big question mark for me. It's one of those things where I don't feel like I need it, and unless I'm reminded about it,
Yeah.
you know what I mean. I won't really think about it.
Yeah, I mean, I love that they're really paying this homage to Stephen King now, but they're kind of going a little overboard with it. Like, this is the thing that bugs me about the movie industry is like they dipped their toe in just a hair with it, and it was a huge success. So now it's like drinking from the hydrant. Like, can you just give us a like small amounts of movie? Like, I just feel there's so much now. They're just throwing everything at you, and then you kind of get, oh, it's an overkill. So there's got to be a method to the madness. And so, like you, it wasn't even on my radar. I didn't even know, they were doing this. And now, of course, it's starting to get advertised because it's released, on November 8th. I don't know. Um, we'll see.
Well, well, look, this might make you happy.
What?
So the original Candyman, it was Tony Todd who played the Candyman, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's his name.
Yeah.
So it was there was an article, I think it was Hollywood Reporter, that had said that he will reprise his role as the Candyman in Jordan
Really?
Peele's remake. Yeah. So that was some pretty cool
That's
news that I had
awesome.
across over the last week. So that's I haven't seen. I'm gonna have to go to IMDb and check out Tony Todd's page. I don't know if I've. He hasn't really been in anything, right? Like I don't think that I've heard of him,
Not
necessarily even being on television any. So I'm gonna have to check that out on IMDb. But I did watch the original Candyman again. I believe it's on Amazon Prime,
mm-hmm.
and it holds up, and it's just it's just as good. And there were lots of things that I had forgotten, about the movie back when I was watching it. Oh my gosh, decades ago, and
He
it
has.
was
So I'm looking at his IMDb page right
so good.
now. So he has not been on anything of note since The Crow in 1994. He was on The Man from Earth in 2007, which I don't even know. Let's see what he's got here. He's been on a lot of little things, but wow, 2019, he is full. Like he has a ton of stuff that's happened. It's almost like he's done, I'm sorry, I'm looking. He's had a lot of little roles, a lot of different small things, but nothing really big since The Crow.
Oh, yeah. All right. Well, you know what? It'll be exciting to see how he's going to be used in this movie, and I'm pretty sure that Jordan Peele knows that he has a certain amount of responsibility, not to at least be as good as the other
Hey,
version. Even
he had a reoccurring role in 2013 on The Young and the Restless. So I'm sorry, I'm wrong. He had a major role. I'm just kidding. No, he was on Young and the Restless quite a bit. And sorry, I was just reading that and that cracked me up because out of all these movies and everything, it's like Young and the Restless, reoccurring role. And I'm like, wow, okay. Anyway,
hey,
a man of
now
many
don't
talents.
listen. There have been a lot of actors that
Hell
Kente
yeah.
and I have had on indie radio, and like there's so many of them say that they've had roles on like Young and the Restless, and we actually had a joke about how the Young and the Restless is like the launching pad for a lot of people that we see on
Keeps the
TV. I
bills
mean,
paid, man, you
oh my
know?
gosh, yeah. Hey, you know what? Back in the day, there was a time where I had the antennas and I would watch Young and the Restless, and but I also would go on the other network. And I was a big fan of I think it was All My Children.
Oh,
Uh,
okay.
is that All My Children was the one that had Erica Kane and all
Yeah,
of that, right?
yeah.
Yeah,
Now
yeah.
this will age me. When I was a kid, I was obsessed with Santa Barbara, and that one went out a long time ago. It doesn't even exist anymore. So, and of course, I watched Days of Our Lives, but I quit watching that in my early 20s.
Well, look. Well, it's really good to hear that he's going to have opportunities, and I think Jordan Peele's going to have fun. I think the great thing about um, whatever it is, I think that he has a lot of space to do
Yeah,
different things with it, and also it's one of those titles that's been away for a while, and there are lots of people who are more of a generation of a Jordan Peele who haven't watched the original. And that's why sometimes, even though I might grow up and I say, hey, why do you need to reboot something or remake something? I have to remind myself that one, everything isn't about me. Two, the thing that I loved is still there. It doesn't like evaporate because somebody wants to do a remake of it.
yeah,
But also, I have to realize that there are a lot of things that are endearing to me. There are people who are a lot younger than me that don't, what I'm saying, they don't know or they don't really, what I'm saying, care about it or
yeah. Or
might.
they don't get it because it was so
Yeah,
long ago. It's
yeah.
a whole
So,
other generation of memories and background and no cell phones or you have to kind of recreate some of these loved movies because they don't have I mean, our lives are so different today that it doesn't make sense in a kid's mind watching a movie where you had to get up and change the channel or you couldn't call for help on a phone, on a cell phone, or why would this have happened? You got camera phones, like you kind of have to tweak things to keep them alive, keep the main memory alive for a
yeah.
new generation.
Relatability. You've got to put it
Yeah,
in a format that's relatable to the people who are going to be the ones responsible for bringing in the
absolutely.
box office dollars. But you know what? This was fun. I definitely, I miss Moni, but I'm pretty sure she is going to have a lot to talk about when she
Oh
gets
yeah.
back for Comic Con. It's always fun to do shows when you and I tag team up. So sometimes we
Hmm.
can just dive in and laugh a little bit more than usual. But as far as social media is concerned, how about you let the creepers know where they can find you?
All right. I am Creepin' at Kristi on Instagram and at creepin_it on Twitter. And if you are so inclined, we would love it if you would go and leave us a positive review on whatever platform you're listening to, or subscribe or follow us, please. It makes a difference and helps us out.
Yep, not only does it make a difference and help us out, depending on the amount of reviews that you get, it just makes you more visible when people are doing searches for certain types of podcasts. So you can follow me on Twitter at militant_marker, and it is the same on Instagram. Once again, it's always a pleasure. We're winding out the year. Gosh, we're
I
less than
know.
3 months away from 2020, and that is such a trip. So, you know what? It's going to be exciting to close out the year. There are some other movies that are going to be coming out this year that we'll definitely be talking about on the pop culture side. I'm excited about that. And since it's Halloween, I know that everybody can pretty much look forward to Kristi and Moni, bringing the great Halloween content and topics to talk about. I'm always going to err on the side of talking about TV shows and movies. And at some point, once you and Moni have both finished Marianne, I think that we couldn't not go through the rest of this year and not talk about it.
Yeah.
So we'll definitely find a way to kind of piece together conversations around that. And Creepers, we would definitely like your reaction to different movies and different TV shows that you've seen. You can always post content on our Facebook page. And, unless you have anything else to say, Kristi, we can close this thing out.
No, all I think is creep it real, y'all.
All right, everybody, creep it real.
Lean your head against my shoulder. This world is getting colder. I will keep you warm and safe. You just need some